Welcome to today's Deep Dives. I'm your host, and as always, I'm joined by our resident expert. And what if I told you that 1 plus 1 equals 1?
I'd probably say you need a math tutor.
Right, fair enough. But what if I told you that accepting that deliberate, glaring math error is, according to one deeply specific philosophical framework, the absolute prerequisite for ending all human wars?
It is, yeah. It's an incredibly bold premise to start with.
It really is.
Because, we are so conditioned to accept human nature as this intrinsically messy, chaotic, deeply flawed thing. We just assume conflict is baked into our DNA.
Yeah, that it's inevitable.
Exactly. But the source material we're examining today entirely rejects that foundational premise. It argues that a perfect human nature isn't just some unattainable ideal. It's an urgent structural necessity if mankind has any hope of surviving itself.
And that ambitious claim is the mission of our deep dive today. We're unpacking a highly detailed blueprint by Xue Feng, simply titled Standards of Perfect Human Nature.
It's quite a document.
It is. It comes right out of the gate claiming that without adopting this specific standard, you as an individual listener have no bright future. And on a macro level, it warns that without it, mankind is doomed to an endless cycle of competition, confrontation, and war.
Basically, we're looking at an attempt to map out a supreme human value system designed to guarantee peace.
Right. And to build that map, the text establishes 8 distinct conditions for achieving this perfect state.
Yeah, and it's quite a rigorous list. It starts with revering the greatest creator in nature, which sets up a sort of cosmic hierarchy. Then it demands abandoning the desire to win or combat others, completely neutralizing the competitive drive.
Which is huge.
Oh, absolutely. It also requires profound modesty, boundless compassion, the discipline to remain totally calm in both adversity and prosperity, and living a completely natural life without seeking out the bizarre or abnormal.
I feel like we could spend hours just debating the psychological implications of abandoning the desire to win.
Oh, for sure.
But to really do this source material justice, we aren't going to lightly skim over all 8. Instead, we're zooming all the way in on the 8th and final condition on that list, the ultimate capstone of this philosophy.
The big one.
Yeah, and that condition is stated simply as love life, love labor.
It sounds deceptively simple, doesn't it? Almost quaint.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second.
Yeah.
Because love life genuinely sounds like something you'd see printed in a cursive font on a throw pillow.
Right, like a cheap platitude.
Exactly. It feels like a platitude.
Yeah.
But the way this text defines what a life actually is, it completely upends our normal biological understanding. Which brings us right back to that mathematical paradox I mentioned at the top.
The 1 plus 1 equals 1.
Yeah. The text states, as a foundational rule,
Yep.
that 1 plus 1 equals 1. How does breaking the most basic rule of arithmetic explain human existence?
Well, because it isn't approaching this in a math equation, It's presenting a metaphysical formula. The text divides human existence into 2 distinct, separate components. So the first one in that equation is purely physical. It's your flesh.
Like biological matter.
Right, your cells, your organs, the biological material that was provided by your parents. The second one is the spiritual entity. This is the non-physical consciousness or essence, which, according to the text's internal logic, is endowed by the greatest creator.
So the equation is basically saying flesh plus spirit equals one complete life.
That is the core mechanism, yes. And the text is incredibly rigid about the limitations of separating these 2 halves.
How so?
Well, flesh that lacks a spiritual entity is just a lump of biological matter. It has no animating force. It's a dead body.
Right.
Conversely, the spiritual entity floating around without flesh is completely useless in our physical reality. It's incapable of moving, interacting, or acting within a 3-dimensional space.
It reminds me of a Mars rover.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, think about it. The biological flesh is the rover, the wheels, the cameras, the incredibly complex hardware built by the engineers, or in this case, the parents.
Right.
And the spiritual entity is the signal from mission control. You can have a billion-dollar rover sitting on the surface of Mars, but without the signal to pilot it, it's just an expensive paperweight.
Exactly.
And a signal broadcasting into the void without a rover to receive it can't actually explore the planet. You need both to have a functioning mission.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The text itself uses a computer analogy, flesh as hardware, spirit as software. But the rover analogy perfectly captures the isolation of the two parts.
Yeah.
The physical body is strictly a carrier. It's a vehicle for the spiritual entity to navigate this specific dimension. And understanding that duality is crucial because it directly informs what loving life actually entails in this framework. It's a dual obligation.
Meaning, if life is the combination of the two, then loving life means you have an ethical obligation to respect the providers of both components.
Exactly.
You have to fiercely protect your physical flesh, to honor the hardware engineers, your parents. And simultaneously, you have to nurture the spiritual entity to show reverence to the software developer, the greatest creator.
And because life is defined as this incredibly sacred, precise combination of forces, the text enforces unimaginably strict rules on how it must be protected.
It doesn't leave much wiggle room.
No wiggle room at all. The text takes an absolute, uncompromising stance. Life is above everything else in the universe, period.
Wow.
Furthermore, every single life is equal. There's no hierarchy where a king's 1+1 equation is worth more than a peasant's.
Which naturally leads to some incredibly radical ethics regarding conflict. I mean, if every single life is an equally sacred vessel for a spiritual entity, then destroying that vessel has to be the ultimate crime.
It is the ultimate crime. The text argues that destroying a life is actively showing contempt for the parents who built the body and declaring war against the creator who provided the spirit.
That's a heavy way to frame it.
It really is. Because of this, the text categorizes war as fundamentally criminal. Always. It explicitly states that no matter how many grand historical justifications are provided, whether a war is launched for the interests of a nation, a religion, a political party, or a race, it remains a crime against humanity.
I have to challenge the practicality of that, though. What about a strictly defensive war?
Well,
If someone attacks your country, wouldn't protecting the lives of your citizens justify fighting back?
not according to the internal logic of this text. It completely strips away the concept of a just war.
Wait, really?
Yeah, that text doesn't leave room for loopholes. It argues that combating evil with evil just perpetuates the destruction of the sacred vessels. It demands that humanity outgrow the instinct for violent confrontation entirely if it wants to survive.
That is a staggering level of pacifism. And it seems to extend that exact same logic to the justice system, specifically when it comes to the death penalty.
It does. The text categorizes the death penalty as a crime committed by the state.
So even for the worst criminals.
Right. The argument is that no matter how heinous or unpardonable a criminal's actions might be, deliberately dismantling their physical hardware is a violation of that sacred equation.
But wait, if the physical body is this sacred hardware meant to explore the world, isn't locking it in a concrete cage for 50 years also a violation of the equation? You're basically putting the rover in a box.
That's a really sharp distinction to draw, and the text addresses it by focusing on the preservation of the equation itself.
Okay, how?
The text argues that once a dangerous individual is arrested, stripped of their societal rights, and confined so they can no longer harm others, society's obligation is fulfilled. You've restricted the vehicle's coordinates, yes, but you haven't destroyed the vehicle.
Ah, I see.
The spiritual entity is still intact within the flesh. The text's exact phrasing is that there is no need to fight ruthless against ruthless and evil to evil.
It's an absolute rejection of retribution. But this is where the text wades into highly controversial waters.
It certainly does.
And strictly looking at the internal logic of this framework, setting aside any of our own personal or political views, which is what we always do here, it reaches a conclusion about early biological development that seems to totally contradict its rigid stance on protecting life.
Yes.
While it outlaws war and the death penalty, the text explicitly states that abortion is not a crime.
And this raises a massive structural question for the reader, right? How does a text that considers the destruction of life the ultimate sin reconcile that specific stance?
Exactly.
And the answer relies entirely on the precise metaphysical timeline of when the software is actually installed into the hardware.
It goes right back to the equation.
It does. According to this philosophy, you cannot assume that a complete life, meaning flesh plus spirit, is formed at the moment of conception or even as the body develops.
Okay.
The text claims that a fetus is exclusively physical flesh, it's just hardware under construction. Until about 10 days or so before birth, the fetus possesses no spiritual entity of its own.
Oh, wow. 10 days.
Yeah, roughly 10 days. Before that, its biological activity is simply an extension of the maternal parent's life force.
So, to use our analogy, the rover's being assembled in the factory, but it hasn't been assigned a pilot yet.
Exactly. The text posits a highly specific, almost sci-fi metaphysical event that occurs roughly 10 days before birth. It claims this is the exact moment the spiritual entity from a higher dimension finally enters the fetus's flesh.
And how does that happen?
Well, the text describes the mechanism for this transfer as happening through a space tunnel via something called the anode black hole body.
The anode black hole body. Okay, I'm struggling with that one. What exactly is a black hole doing in a maternity ward?
I know, it sounds incredibly dense,
Hmm,
but in the context of the text's pseudophysics, it represents an energy conduit.
like a portal.
Think of it as a metaphysical funnel or a dimensional gateway. Because the spiritual entity exists in a non-physical space and the flesh exists in a dense three-dimensional space, they can't just bump into each other.
Right, they need a bridge.
Exactly. The anode black hole body is the mechanism, the specific tunnel, that allows consciousness to cross the boundary between dimensions and bind to the physical brain and body.
So it's almost like a metaphysical Bluetooth pairing.
A Bluetooth pairing, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, the hardware is fully powered on, the battery's charged, the operating system is booted up, but it's not until day -10 that the signal actually connects to the cloud and downloads the user profile.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The connection relies on that specific mechanism activating. And the text provides its own grounded analogy to clarify the ethical distinction between biological growth and actual life, using the concept of building a house.
I remember this part. The text points out that building a house requires a massive amount of physical labor. You dig a foundation, you pour concrete, you frame the walls, install the roof.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Right, it's undeniably a structure. But a deserted building with 4 walls isn't a home. It only transforms into a home when the construction is finished, the doors are unlocked, and the people actually move their lives inside.
Precisely.
In this framework, terminating a pregnancy before that 10-day window isn't ending a complete life, because the spiritual occupant hasn't traveled through the space tunnel into the physical house yet.
It highlights how strictly, almost ruthlessly, the text adheres to its own rule. The physical form must exist, but it holds no independent sanctity until the spiritual entity arrives to complete the equation. Only then does it gain that absolute protection.
So if we manage to survive the space tunnel, and we agree not to wage war or execute each other, what are we actually supposed to do with this sacred vessel?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Is there a user manual for the daily routine? Because avoiding destruction is really just playing defense. How does this framework say a perfect human should actively live?
Well, the text transitions from defense to offense by breaking the active living of life down into 3 core principles. If you want to achieve perfect human nature, you have to follow these steps.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first principle of loving life is to actively revere the greatest creator.
To maintain the connection to the software developer.
Precisely. The text warns that without revering the origin of our spiritual software, our life becomes like water without a source, or a tree without a root. You become spiritually unmoored, and your inner life is liable to wither at any moment.
Which seamlessly transitions into the second principle, focusing on the physical origins, respecting our parents.
Yes.
Because without them enduring the labor of building the hardware, our spiritual entity would just be trapped in that other dimension, completely unable to experience the sunset or eat a good meal or interact with this world.
And this is where the philosophy sharpens into a very pointed cultural critique. It observes a pervasive hypocrisy in how modern humans navigate their obligations.
It really pulls no punches here. It paints this incredibly vivid, depressing picture of modern society.
Oh, it's bleak.
Yeah, people spending all their waking hours frantically chasing promotions, obsessing over their stock portfolios, or desperately seeking fame. They're entirely consumed by their own ego, while they let their aging parents pass their final years in lonely, isolated desperation. And it goes even further, calling out religious hypocrisy specifically.
Yes, the contrast it draws there is fascinating.
It points out people who will spend massive amounts of their wealth traveling to distant temples, burning expensive incense, and kneeling down to worship statues of gods, while leaving their actual flesh and blood parents to live out their days helpless and ignored.
It's brutal.
It's essentially pointing out the absurdity of worshiping the software developer while letting the engineers who built your specific sacred hardware starve in the cold.
It's a devastating critique of distorted priorities. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text makes a highly unexpected pivot right after establishing this.
Yeah, this part surprised me.
It says that respecting your parents is absolutely crucial, yes. It's how you show gratitude, and it's how you pay back the cosmic debt you owe for your physical body. However, it is not the purpose of life.
I found that distinction so compelling. You owe a massive debt for your hardware, and you absolutely must pay it back with care and respect. But simply clearing a debt doesn't give you a destination.
No, it doesn't.
It just brings your ledger back to zero. You still have to drive the rover somewhere.
Exactly. And that brings us to the third principle, which is the true engine of this philosophy. The ultimate purpose of life, the active, daily expression of perfect human nature, is found entirely in labor. The text explicitly declares, love work is love life.
So what does this all mean? Because when you listening hear the word labor or work, you're almost certainly picturing a 9-to-5 grind.
Oh, absolutely.
You're picturing commuting in traffic, answering endless emails, appeasing a boss, paying a mortgage. But the text defines work in a way that completely reorients that concept. It puts trimming a piece of lawn and writing a masterpiece novel on the exact same philosophical level.
It does, because it strips away the economic class markers we usually attach to work. The text defines work as any activity that creates either material or spiritual wealth by using the combination of mind and hands.
Mind and hands.
That's the non-negotiable requirement. The mind and the hands working in tandem to create wealth.
And we definitely need to define what it means by wealth here, because it's absolutely not talking about accumulating capital or hoarding resources.
Far from it. It divides the concept of wealth into two noble categories. Material wealth is anything physical independent from consciousness that is visible, touchable, and genuinely useful to human existence.
Give me an example.
So growing a field of crops, building a sturdy chair, sewing a garment to keep someone warm.
Got it. And the spiritual wealth.
Spiritual wealth is anything that can arouse, encourage, and uplift people's hearts and spirits, and it has to be able to withstand the test of time.
So that would be philosophy, literature, painting, music, even cinema things that leave a lasting positive impact on the human condition.
Exactly.
The text literally lists examples of this noble labor, and the list is so beautifully mundane. It says trimming a lawn is noble work. Boiling a pot of water is work.
Boiling water, yeah.
Making a hairdo, removing a pile of junk from a street, planting a single flower, delivering a baby. All of these require the mind and the hands, and all of them create something either physically useful or spiritually uplifting. Therefore, they're all the highest expression of a perfect human life.
The text insists that labor is the absolute noblest human activity for maintaining health, gaining true happiness, and ensuring survival. It argues that every single achievement in human history is simply the accumulated result of this kind of labor.
It really reframes everything.
It does, but to fully grasp the boundaries of this, we have to look at what the text explicitly excludes.
Right. Hold on, though. If boiling water counts as noble work, what isn't work?
Activities centered entirely on consumption, self-indulgence, or basic maintenance do not count. Inviting guests over and sending gifts, not work. Keeping fit and exercising, not work.
Let me push back on one specifically, because the text explicitly says traveling for fun is not work. I think a massive portion of our listeners would argue that traveling, seeing new cultures, exploring the world is the exact moment they feel the most alive.
I know, it's a tough pill to swallow.
Why does the text view that as somehow lesser or even parasitic?
It's a harsh categorization, but it comes down to the mechanism of creation versus consumption. When you travel purely for fun, you are consuming the material and spiritual wealth created by others.
Oh, I see.
You're consuming the roads they paved, the food they grew, the architecture they designed. You are experiencing the world, which is fine, but you aren't adding to the collective wealth of humanity in that moment. You are draining the battery rather than charging the grid.
That's a stark way to look at it.
And it applies this same logic to basic bodily functions. Eating, drinking, and what it bluntly calls pulling and peeing, none of that is labor. It is simply maintaining the hardware.
And obviously, it also excludes destructive activities. Stealing, robbing, cheating, blackmailing, or reaping profits from the hard work of others. Those are categorically excluded from the definition of labor.
Completely.
Which naturally leads to this incredible macro view of civilization. It scales this philosophy up from the individual creating wealth to society as a massive interconnected whole.
Right. It argues that an ideal society, one that has actually achieved this perfect human nature, is one where absolutely everyone respects and involves themselves in labor.
Everyone contributes.
Everyone. Remember, there's no high or low likes in this framework, and therefore no high or low labor. The person quietly removing a pile of junk is engaging in the exact same noble pursuit as the renowned philosopher.
But a society that despises work, a society that tries to hack the system to consume without creating. The text uses a deeply unforgiving word for that. It calls it a parasitic society.
Yes. A society that looks down on physical labor, that idolizes people who find ways to extract wealth without creating anything of value, is diagnosed as having a distorted human nature.
And what happens to that society?
The text predicts the exact trajectory. It becomes confused about basic right and wrong. It becomes profoundly unfair, unreasonable, and deeply unhappy. It incentivizes corruption because people want the rewards of wealth without the dignity of labor.
This is the downward spiral.
A vicious, inescapable cycle that's inevitably bound to collapse. According to this text, despising work is, on a societal level, destroying life.
Love work is love life. It's such a profound, almost jarring reframing of how we spend our hours. We've spent this deep dive navigating a truly massive cosmic vision for humanity.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started with that strange 1 + 1 = 1 paradox, exploring how physical hardware and spiritual software combine to make a life. We dug into the uncompromising rules for protecting that life, rejecting all war, rejecting the death penalty, and exploring that wild space tunnel mechanism of when consciousness actually arrives.
The anode black hole body.
Right. And finally, we landed on this idea that the ultimate human calling isn't endless meditation or conquering enemies, but the daily humble act of creating wealth with our minds and hands.
And yet, after laying out all of these grand societal laws and heavy metaphysical structures, the text concludes its thoughts on life with a surprisingly fragile, deeply intimate note.
It really does. After all the rigid rules, it brings everything back down to the quiet reality of the individual human experience.
The text leaves the reader with a poetic metaphor. It reminds us that while you can put a price tag on almost every material thing in this world, life itself cannot be bought.
Right.
And despite the fact that life is incredibly tenacious, fighting to survive against all odds, it is simultaneously frail and delicate. It requires constant, gentle care. We aren't guaranteed to bloom gorgeous flowers or harvest bumper crops just because we exist.
So what does it compare life to?
It compares a perfect human life to a stream. The ultimate hope is simply that our life is like a stream, joyfully singing, running through the creeks, ravines, and valleys from the fountain of life, hoping to smoothly flow into the sea, the arms of life, without drying up midway.
Just a stream trying to make it to the ocean without evaporating. It's a deeply grounding image.
It really is.
And that leaves you with something really fascinating to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. If you look at your own existence through the lens of this specific framework, if your physical body is just this incredibly complex piece of hardware waiting to be directed by the spiritual software you were given,
Right.
and your highest, most noble purpose isn't to just consume or travel or endlessly maintain the machine, but to actively combine your mind and your hands to create material or spiritual wealth. What unique piece of wealth are you currently designing your life to produce?
It's a profound question that forces you to evaluate exactly what you're leaving behind.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.